One of the things that associations tend to get wrong about engagement is that we define engagement based on what we want to happen. And then we get mad at our members because they won't do what we want them to do. And so, when you think about what are the kinds of things that we tend to want and how we tend to define engagement, it's stuff like, we have a certain amount of committee seats that need to be filled. So we want people to serve on our committees. And, we have these revenue goals. So we want people to join. We want people to renew. We want them to buy our professional development materials. We want them to come to our conference, and that's all really internally focused. And the thing is, your members don't really care what the association wants.
Hi, welcome to the Gripe podcast. In this podcast, we learn how to grow member-based organizations. I'm your host Farhat Khan. I am the CEO of Gripe Digital. We are a digital agency and we help professional associations grow their membership by building membership websites. If you want to grow the membership of your professional association, please take a look at the workshops on our website at gripe.ca/workshops. That is grype.ca/workshops. This is a live recording of our podcast episode with Elizabeth with a live audience. So if you are joining us live today, then welcome. We will get a chance to take some questions from the audience. So if you do have any question, please submit your question on chat anytime during the podcast, and we will get to them as soon as we can. Today we are joined with Elizabeth Engel. Elizabeth is a marketing strategy consultant from Spark Consulting, and she actually has some very interesting ideas on how to generate explosive growth of your association membership. With that, let's get started. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. Can you start by telling us a bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. And thanks for having me, Farhad. I really appreciate Gripe inviting me to talk with you all today. So I've been an association executive for almost 25 years. I've been a CIE Certified Association Exec since 2004 and running Spark since 2012. As Farhad mentioned, the focus of my work with Spark is on membership strategy, marketing strategy, and explosive growth for associations. When I'm not doing that, when I'm not helping associations grow, I am an avid cook. I love to read. I love to garden. And I've been studying boxing for the past 3 years and started sparring this past June.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I don't think I want to be anywhere near you, Elizabeth, since you're learning boxing.
It is a lot of fun, I must admit.
That's great. Elizabeth, so we hear associations complain about the member engagement all the time, right? So no one is happy with the member engagement, except very few, I think. So what do you think associations are doing wrong with their membership engagement?
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to start this conversation because one of the things that associations tend to get wrong about engagement is that we define engagement based on what we want to happen. And then we get mad at our members because they won't do what we want them to do. And so, when you think about what are the kinds of things that we tend to want and how we tend to define engagement, it's stuff like, we have a certain amount of committee seats that need to be filled. So we want people to serve on our committees. And, we have these revenue goals. So we want people to join. We want people to renew. We want them to buy our professional development materials. We want them to come to our conference, and that's all really internally focused. And the thing is, your members don't really care what the association wants. What the association wants is not particularly motivating to them. They aren't engaging because you're kind of like that friend who only ever talks about herself and never asks how the other person is doing, or like she doesn't listen at all when you try to tell her how you're doing. Members can see that we're being a little self-centered. So in 2015, I wrote a white paper called Leading Engagement from the Outside In with Anna Caravelli of the Demand Networks. It's free, that talks about precisely this issue. It talks about how to take a member-centric perspective on the world and on engagement, what that is, why it's important, how you do it, etc. So the goal of all this idea of being member-centric is for associations to become a vital partner in your members' success, not just kind of this thing that's nice to have and then is easily dumped when times get tough. The way you do that is by developing a deep understanding of your members' most important goals and their biggest problems, really stepping into their worlds and then becoming a solution provider for them. And so we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go along, but there's specific stuff that you can do. Anna and I discovered 8 keys to member-centric engagement that are all things that are conceptually simple, but not necessarily easy to do. You know, the other thing to think about with regards to engagement, and I'm going to have to give a shout out to Peggy Hoffman on this one, is that she created something called an engagement continuum. Now, the engagement continuum that she created is focused primarily on association volunteers, but I think it's equally applicable for members. So, basically the idea of this continuum is that your members have different levels of need for the association and different levels of ability to be engaged at kind of different points in their lives/careers. And the genius of this model is that when we think about engagement, whether it's volunteer engagement or kind of more broadly member engagement, we tend to mentally picture a pyramid, which limits opportunity to contribute the higher up you go, because obviously the pyramid's getting smaller and smaller, and it ranks contributions. So it at least makes it appear like there are some contributions that are more important than others. Therefore, there are some people who are more important than others. And also, once you get to the pinnacle of of engagement, there's nowhere to go but down, right? But the continuum model is all on a level, and people can shift back and forth along that continuum as their own needs and as their own ability to be involved changes, which I think is genius.
Right, right. You know what? Like that reminds me. You mentioned that we really want to make it member centric and then outside in. So understand like where your members are at, and then you mentioned like different members will actually have different needs at different stages of their career, and then based on the needs, their level of engagement might vary as well, right? So
Absolutely.
So if we are actually designing the engagement in a continuum, then how do you see members like moving back and forth between the different stages? Like, can you explain that a little more?
Sure. So, if you think about within your own association, you're going to have all kinds of different segments of members. Some of those might, and they can be based on all kinds of different things, right? So some of those can be based on kind of where people are in their career. Some of them can be based on where they are in their life. Some of them can be based on where they're physically located. But as you kind of move from perhaps like one particular kind of continuum that you can think of is, okay, I'm in school studying whatever the thing is of our profession or industry, right? So you're kind of one stage of your life. There are certain kinds of things that you need to accomplish, right? Okay, so I'm studying this. I need to begin establishing my professional credentials. I need to begin establishing my professional network. I'm going to graduate at some point. I'm going to need a job, right? Then you move into being a young professional, right? You're or somebody, also this could be equally applicable for somebody who's switching careers, where they're not necessarily a young professional, but they're a new professional. Well, all of a sudden, again, you've got different kinds of needs there. At that point, again, you're probably more looking for, I have needs that need to be met. Again, building a network, finding a job, establishing my credentials as a professional, maybe developing some of the kinds of professional skills that aren't necessarily discipline skills. Like the whole thing of like, I studied whatever I studied in college, but now I need to learn how to do whatever this actual job is. So you need those kinds of things. And then as you continue to progress, you start to move maybe into a little bit more of a phase when you can be doing a little bit more giving back to the profession, that might continue for a while, but then say you hit midlife, all of a sudden you're sandwich generation, and you've got kids who are now junior high school who have needs. You maybe are taking care of elderly parents. Then you might need to step back a little bit, and you're looking to kind of be, more in that keeping touch with your network and receiving information phase of your career. Then as you go along even further in your career, you might be getting towards or hitting retirement. That then involves sort of a different take on how you'd engage with your profession, the kinds of things that you can contribute, the kinds of things you're looking for. And this is all a flow back and forth of what am I looking for?
Right, right, right. So, Elizabeth, if we are actually looking at our membership in general, as an association, I'm looking at like overall membership. Now, is there a way to segment our members better so we can actually design the benefits for them?
Absolutely, yeah. And the first thing to remember when you're thinking about member engagement and segmentation is no association can accommodate every single member being maximally engaged in everything they do, right? Like you have to dramatically increase your staff if everybody wanted to do everything. They don't, which is good, right? Most members are looking for 2 to 3 things when they come to an association, and often what they're looking for, as we were just discussing, correlates to something that's about them. It's where they are in their careers, the size of their business, where they are physically located. There are specific areas of specialization within your profession, whether they're kind of a core member versus a supplier, the platforms they prefer to interact with you on. There's all kinds of things that are going to impact what they're looking for. So what you want to think about doing is asking people, right? Ask your members why they came to you. Listen to what they say. Also pay attention to their behavior, because sometimes what people say and what they actually do don't perfectly match. And you can start putting them into groups, like with like, that allow you to be more focused, more intentional in your communication. So, we tend to think, well, this member may only need 2 things, but if I show them all the wonderful, amazing things the association offers, they'll be so impressed at how much value they're getting for their membership dollar. But that can backfire, right? If you are the member thinking, I only need these 2 things, why am I paying for all that other stuff? Now, does that mean you never tell them about the other stuff? Well, of course not, right? Like as we've just been talking about, people's needs change, their goals change, their challenges change, their interests change, based on life stage, based on career stage, et cetera, right? But, as an example, let's say you have $10,000 to spend to market your conference. Where should you invest that? On the people always come, on the people never come, or on the people sometimes come? Well, the answer is the sometimes people, right? The people who always come are always going to come. The people who never come need to know that you're having a conference, but don't waste a ton of time trying to get them to come to it, because they're never going to come, right? You spend your time and energy on the sometimes people. What segmenting allows you to do is figure out who those people are.
Right, right. And I think like you touched on something very interesting, Elizabeth, that first of all, we need to start by understanding like what our like broad like audience is. So if it is a supplier who's not like really a core member, they might have a very different need, right? So if we are pushing something that is not really meant for them, then that's not a good idea at all. So I think what you're saying is that like to begin with, we have to identify the broad audience categories, like who actually have different needs. So suppliers have a different need like than members. And then within each group, so even say like within the suppliers, I think there will be like a broad spectrum. So which supplier needs what, right? Which supplier needs what, how engaged they are. And within even the member, there will be a broad spectrum, like who are in the middle, sometimes people who are like always, who are never. Now, if we go one level deeper, right? So you are trying to understand who are the sometimes people, right? What do we offer them? What benefits do we offer them? How do we find out what's important to them?
Oh yeah, this gets into the whole thing about like how do you learn about your members, right? How do you become a learning organization? And and the answer is honestly, use every way you possibly can. Seriously, you want to become a learning organization and encourage continuous learning. And there's all kinds of ways to do that. You could do that actively or passively. Active learning, active data collection is stuff like going out and doing a survey. Or it's stuff like conducting a focus group or doing interviews. You're sort of actively soliciting feedback from people. You can also do passive data collection, right? That's the whole thing of like paying attention to behavior. I didn't go out there and ask people how many, professional development training modules did you buy in the past year. I went and looked, right? Again, what they say, what they do, don't always match. And then you also want to be doing formal and informal data collection. So again, formal is like a structured study or a structured research project. And again, that could be something like a survey. That can also be something like looking at your membership data, right? Like doing actual like data analytics on everything from email open and click rates to, registrations. Be like one of the big things that associations struggle with is any kind of virtual program, who registers versus who shows up, how long do they actually stick with the virtual program, so that's, those, you can do like formal studies related to all that stuff. But also, although the plural of anecdote is not in fact data, right, informal data collection is also really important. And that's everything, from email interactions to phone calls to, when we all can actually gather in person, hallway conversations, stuff that happens at your board meetings, stuff that happens at your committee meetings, etc. You want to always kind of have your feelers out for that kind of feedback coming in. And again, anecdotal information that you get from a conversation with somebody is not data. You shouldn't like, oh, one person told me this one thing one time, so we're going to run out and change everything the association does. Don't do that, right? But that will give you clues as to the kinds of stuff you should be looking for in some of those more formal data collection efforts and data analysis efforts. Now, that's all great, right? So you've got your input coming in. You've got data coming in from as many ways and many formats and many styles as you possibly can. You have to take the next step. And this is where associations tend to fall down. A lot of times if we look for it, there's plenty of data out there on our members. There's a lot of stuff that we can track, particularly as increasing amounts of our interactions with members are mediated by technology. That makes it extremely easy to track what's going on. The problem is, everybody knows the answer to this one, right? Silos. Information doesn't get shared. And that's something that we really have to work to overcome as associations. You need to be sharing data and information widely and transparently within your association. Intelligence doesn't do the overall organization any good if it's trapped in one department or one program area or one function. Also, you often get the best insights into like, what does this data all mean and what's the story that it's telling us, when you can kind of bring multiple perspectives to bear on looking at it. Now, it is occasionally the case, but not often, that, people are not sharing data for reasons of ill intent, right? They're hoarding it on purpose because you've got internal cultural problems, people are power tripping, whatever. But that's not common. What's most often the case is you just haven't figured out an easy, consistent, frequent way to share this stuff, right? And so, that presents a real challenge. And an obvious example of this, right? There's a huge amount of wisdom about what's going on with your members hiding in plain sight in whoever's dealing with all your frontline customer service stuff. Wherever they are, if they're in membership, if they're in product sales, if they're in registration, your meeting registration folks, right? There's a huge amount of information about what's going on there with your frontline customer service staff. But there's usually no easy path for it to make its way up the hierarchy to your C-suite decision makers. That's the kind of thing where, like, nobody has bad intentions there. It's just there's no mechanism to get it from point A to point B where the people who know and the people who decide can all easily talk to each other and share what's going on. That's the kind of thing that you want to think about trying to fix.
Right. Elizabeth, do you have any approach that might work to actually bridge the gap?
Oh, yeah. There's a variety of things that you can do. Certainly dashboards are useful. You have to think pretty carefully about what you want to include with them. It's easy to just whatever gets measured gets managed. I think it was Jack Welch who said that, right? But there's a tendency to measure the stuff that's easy to measure, right? And so that's one of the things that can go wrong with dashboards is you're like, oh, well, what's the stuff we can report? The stuff that you can report or can report easily isn't always necessarily the stuff that's actually going to provide insight. And so you want to think about that. You also want to think about trying to create opportunities to talk cross hierarchy and cross functionally. So, the idea there is creating the common term that people use for this is like a matrixed team around different kinds of projects. So this is a completely different way of thinking about how you structure yourselves, because we're used to structuring ourselves in departments based on functions, right? We've got membership, and we've got professional development / education / learning, and we've got our meetings team, and like everybody's out there all by their functions, and there is some utility in that, right? Like if you're going to put out a magazine, you need people who understand how to do publications. You do need people who understand LMS and curriculum development and all that kind of thing in your education department. But you also want to create opportunities for sort of creative collisions where people from different departments can at least know what's going on with each other, and have the opportunity to work on cross-departmental projects together. Because that's when you create these kinds of opportunities and also relationships for sharing information broadly across hierarchical levels and across departmental functions. And that's where you can start to get some of the really interesting aha moments that happen when people start putting together all the different pieces of the data that they have on your audiences, and you can begin to see how it all starts to fit together.
Right. And Elizabeth, as you're going through this, I think someone has to take the ownership of this work of like bridging the gap, right?
Yes.
So if you ask me, I think it should be the membership director or someone who's responsible for membership growth who should actually take the lead, and then I think that is the person who's in a very good role to bring the troops in, bring the C and D suites in, and then have them talk and make sure that the data gets collected all the way, it goes all the way to the top, and then there is an action from the top as well to actually do something about it.
And that's a really important point that you raise, is much like any kind of big culture work in an association or any organization. I mean, it's not just associations. You have to have support from the top. The people need to have responsibility and authority to do the things they need to do, and that requires enthusiastic, full-hearted, full-throated support from the very top levels of the organization. Because if your CEO / executive director, if your board, if your most senior execs aren't behind an initiative, it's going nowhere ultimately.
Absolutely. And I think there's another thing that we often are scared to look at the data because we are worried what we will find, right? And
yes.
This happens to me all the time, right?
Yes.
I look at the stats and then every time I look at the stats, I'm actually worried, what am I going to find? But then I realize that the fact that knowing is better than not knowing. And then the moment I know, we can do something about it. If you don't know, you cannot even act on it.
There's totally this fear of finding out that your baby is ugly. You're I put all this time and energy and effort into creating this thing, whatever the thing is, and I love it. I think everybody should love it. I think it's amazing. And then you go to the data and you're like, oh, nobody loves it. My baby is ugly. But here's the thing. If you're using data, it takes the subjectivity out of it. So what I mean by that is, there's this element of I like it. The board likes it. My director likes it. My CEO likes it. Well, that's some powerful member likes it. That's nice. What happens when that person doesn't like it? But all that is subjective. And that's when you can get into the whole thing of people's feelings get hurt. And emotions can get involved in decisions where ideally they wouldn't be involved. When you could go to data and say, the data says this is good. The data says this needs more work. The data says we should kill this. All of a sudden, it's not like you don't like my program, you don't like me. This, it takes all of that out of the process of trying to figure out, now what do we do with all the programs, products, and services that we provide for people.
Right. So I'd like to go back one step. So if I'm
totally.
So if I'm a small association, and then if I actually don't have a lot of budget to do a mass campaign or a mass survey, if we only have limited budget, how would you like to collect feedback from your members?
Can we talk about the lean startup?
Sure.
Can we talk about lean startup
Sure,
methodology?
totally,
Okay,
totally.
yeah, totally. Okay, so another white paper that I wrote with Guillermo Ortiz de Zarate from the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards a couple of years ago about lean startup methodology and how you would apply it in an association environment, right? That's the genius. So people tend to look at this and they're like, why on earth would an association be talking about something that has to do with startups? We have nothing in common. That's not true. We actually, one of the key things about this is how you get quick feedback, quick data on what's going on in a resource poor environment. That's what startups and associations have in common, right? Is a lot of times we don't have like a giant marketing department with a giant marketing budget and all these people and all this time and all these resources, right? Like we've got to try to be able to make decisions, and find out the information we need to make decisions with limited resources and then be able to make those decisions relatively quickly. That's what Lean Startup allows us to do. Okay, so there's this great book written by the guy who originated the concept. His name is Eric Ries. The book is called The Lean Startup. Guillermo and I use that as one of our sort of key reference documents in writing the white paper. But again, it's called Innovate the Lean Way. It's also free. And it applies lean startup principles in an association environment. So the thing that's cool about lean startup is it says, don't spend all your time constructing all this elaborate stuff and making everything perfect and operating all behind the scenes, behind the curtain. No one can know until everything is ready. And we have a real problem with that in associations because members and our board members are different than customers. They have more of a sense of ownership of the association. And we tend to be more worried about releasing something that's not perfect because they aren't just buying a widget. They are owners of the association in a way that somebody who's just a customer of, pick your favorite business is not. And so we get really freaked out about the idea of releasing stuff that's not perfect. The lean startup says, forget that. You got to totally change your mindset about how you do this. Now, does that mean that you do like the minimum viable product? That's part of the methodologies. You've got to create a minimum viable product, right? Not the perfect product, not every single feature you could possibly ever think of with every single question answered and every single thing figured out, right? Minimum viable product. Does that mean you just release it to absolutely everyone in your membership? Oh, no, you do not, right? You have to find the people, and they are there. This is another segment of your members who are jazzed about the idea of getting to beta test something and offer you feedback. That's who you're looking for, because that's what the minimum viable product
The
is,
early
right?
adopters, right?
Totally. Yes. People who are like, that's cool. I want to do that. I don't care if it doesn't work perfectly because I know that it's not going to. They want my feedback to make this better. And I guarantee you, no matter how like kind of old school and traditional you think your association is, there are some people among your membership who are like this. And so what you do is you create this minimum viable product and then you get it out there and you let people start interacting with it and playing with it and saying, oh, well, I like this. I don't like that. Why doesn't it do the other thing? This thing that it does, I don't need this, right? That's the build, measure, learn cycle, which is also very central to lean startup. So, you build the thing, you get it out there, you start measuring what happens when people start using it, and then you learn from that. And that's the whole thing of like, you figure out as you go by working with, co-creating with your members, what you actually need and what you don't need. So in the member engagement white paper, we actually have a story that illustrates this pretty well. It's the National Fluid Power Association. So they're people who do like big industrial hydraulics. Yeah. So, National Fluid Power Association. They are the folks who do big like industrial hydraulics. So this is obviously like a super capital intensive kind of industry. Like this equipment is really expensive. And so they do a lot of industry benchmarking. And they had this online tool, right? Good idea, to let people report all of their stuff. And it was not being used as they hoped it would be. And they're like, okay, well, option one is we like go back as the staff and re-engineer this whole thing, a traditional association way of operating behind the scenes. Let's do it as staff. We're going to re-engineer it back here. And then all of a sudden we'll have like the big ta-da reveal and, it'll be great. And they're like, yeah, see, that's the way we did this version that is not working properly. Option two, let's put together a task force of people whom we know actually are using this, who've like figured out even this like sort of not great thing that we thought was awesome that is maybe not so awesome. And let's let them work with us, co-creating on version 2 of this, which is exactly what they did. They had some really, I'm not going to go into all the details of the story, but they had some really interesting insights about what people actually needed versus like stuff that was in there that they did not in fact need. And so they were able to create a much more streamlined front end experience for sort of like the non-power user folks, like say, for instance, CEOs of these companies who needed to be able to get sort of quick overview data to be able to see, okay, here's what's going on industry wide and kind of here's where we stack up in that. And then they were able to create sort of levels of access for the people who really wanted to like nerd out on the data, right? But by working with their members, they realized we created initially the product just for the nerds, and that's not most people. Right? Like we need to have other layers of stuff here for different layers of people in the organizations of our members. It's a great story. And again, it really illustrates this idea of if you work with your members and bring them in, find those early adopters, let them have a say in what's going on, you can come up with something that's a much better program or product or service than you would have come up with on your own. And this is not an expensive process.
Absolutely. Elizabeth, I'm so glad you brought up Lean Startup. We apply this on all of our projects. So I guess like just to like summarize for our audience, what we're saying is that we want to like listen to the murmurs that we hear from members that, oh, maybe it's good to have this or good to have that. And then like from there, you kind of like design your survey or design your focus group to make sure if other members have the same problem or not, right? And
Absolutely.
then if we find that other members actually have the same problem, then we come up with a solution idea that we can probably solve this member problem using this service or this benefit that we have. And this is where the minimum viable product comes in. And actually the minimum viable product doesn't even have to be anything elaborate, right? It can even be just an idea on a piece of paper.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, it shouldn't be elaborate.
So it can just be an idea on a piece of paper, that you do another focus group on, right? So we come up with this idea and then you do a focus group saying, hey, you know what? We think we have this problem with our members and this is how we're looking to solve it. Do you think this is a good idea? So we collect more feedback. And then when we hear that this is really valuable, we go back and now build something a little more intense.
I'm going to tell on myself with this one. And some folks have been around the association industry for a while. Have heard me tell this story before. But my very first association job, back in the mid-90s, I was working for a scholarly society. And the internet was kind of a fairly new thing for us at this point, right? And so, we when I first started working there, we had our brochure up online, like most people's first websites. And I was like, I'll bet that our members would like to be able to join and renew online if we could make that available for them. Well, of course, like no AMS had that function built yet. It was, 1997. Like nobody could do that yet. And I thought, okay, well, what's an easy way that I could kind of test this and see if this looks appealing to people? So I just threw up like a really basic form on our website that, this is the bad part, collected credit card numbers in blank text and dumped them to an email in blank text. It was 1997. Nobody was looking for credit card numbers online. It was all fine. So anyway, but we decided to run this as a test to say, is it even worthwhile trying to build this? Is anybody going to care? Is anybody going to actually, I think it's a great idea. Does anybody else think it's a great idea? So we just built this, threw it up there, had all the information dumping out in plain text into an email. And sure enough, our members actually did want that, right? And like people were joining and renewing online and we're like, okay, there's enough volume happening here that it is worthwhile for us to spend the money to actually work with our AMS vendor, have them build this for us because it doesn't exist yet, set up real e-commerce with security, set up online credit card processing, even though, again, at that stage, it wasn't super common, like not everybody was doing this yet. And it was all just based on this really simple test. And we're like, oh, okay, great. Yeah, it's worth minimum viable product, right? It's actually worth going ahead building this thing. So it was totally like this Wizard of Oz thing where from the front it looked all automated and everything, and then on the back end we were still totally processing everything by hand.
Right, right. Now, Elizabeth, do you think that there's an opportunity for a lot of associations to kind of like not create new things all the time, but kind of like restructure, repackage their existing benefits so they're easier for people to use based on their needs?
Yes. And, Farad, this gets back to something that you mentioned earlier, which is the idea of going to the data. And you have to be willing to hear bad news and then do something about it, right? So we do surveys or focus groups or interviews, so like whatever type of feedback generating you like to do, and then unfortunately too often nothing really happens, which is really deflating for your members. So that they're thinking like the association asked me what I liked and what I didn't like, and I told them, and then they did nothing. Like, is anybody home? Is anybody listening? Is anybody out there? It doesn't have to be this way, right? So this idea of restructuring benefits, well, why would you restructure a benefit? Well, because it's not doing what it's supposed to do, right? There's a problem it's supposed to be solving. There's a need it's supposed to be meeting. There's a goal it's supposed to be helping people achieve, and it's not doing that. So, you've got that feedback, but now you have to be willing to do something with it. You have to commit to doing something with what you learn, right? And that doesn't mean like every time any member says jump, you immediately say how high, right? But you do, Farhad, just as you mentioned, you need to be listening to those rumbles from your members, like you talked about, and then follow up with that. Ask them more about what they think, and then tell them what happened, right? Even if the answer to the thing that they wanted was no, that's okay, right? Not every you can't always get what you want, right? Like not everybody's going to get everything they want all the time. But if you are paying attention and collecting that feedback from people, sometimes you can make really big positive changes. So another story from the member-centric engagement white paper is the Home Builders and Remodelers Association of Connecticut. They had an awards ceremony. Lots of associations have awards ceremony. A lot of times they're kind of dull. They tend to be focused around recognizing, back to that whole thing, like recognizing what the association wants to happen, right? So we do an awards ceremony that recognizes all of our volunteer leaders and our committee members and our board members, and like they like that, but everybody else is bored to tears. So homebuilders and remodelers heard these rumblings from their members. People don't really like this. Attendance is going down. Everybody's fallen asleep at the awards ceremony. Okay, well, what can we do to change this or make this better? So they talk to people and to find out, what would you really like to see in this? What do you actually need to happen? And they're home builders and remodelers. What they need is a way to differentiate themselves in their marketplace. So they completely switched their awards ceremony around and turned it into member awards. So, they would recognize like, best custom home build, $250,000, best custom home build, $500,000, best bathroom renovation under $20,000, best bathroom renovation over $20,000, like all these kinds of things that were like what their members did. And then their members could use that in their advertising. So now it's like, okay, well, like who do I pick to do my bathroom renovation, right? Well, this guy won, the Hobie Award for bathroom renovations. I should definitely work with them, right? And so that enabled them to make big change, restructuring their benefits in a way that actually addressed something that their members needed, as opposed to addressing something that the association wanted in like, yay, board members. I mean, and that also, I should say, that's not to say you shouldn't recognize your board members, right? Of course, you should still recognize your board members, maybe not at an awards ceremony.
Right, right. Elizabeth, that was a powerful example of how you can actually listen to your members and actually do things that are helping the members. That is amazing. So in general, do you think it's better to actually have like many small benefits that a lot of people can kind of access, or is it better to actually have a few benefits that are really, really effective?
Yeah, that's when I saw that you wanted to talk about that question, I was like, that's a really interesting question, and it's kind of like leading phrasing a little bit, since it would imply that like small benefits are ineffective, and small versus large, I don't know, matters so much as effective versus ineffective, right? The important thing is to have effective benefits. So my dad, who retired several years ago, his whole career he was an instrumentation engineer, and there's tons of engineering associations, right? We all know this. He maintained his membership in one in particular, the Instrument Society of America, for 40 plus years. Why did he do this? They had terrific rates on professional liability insurance for engineers. Now, you know, there are lots of other engineering associations. ISA did lots of stuff beyond what was basically an affinity program, right? But what mattered is my dad had a problem and ISA had a good solution for it. Not to say that people didn't also like their magazine and their conferences and whatever, like all the other stuff they did. That wasn't what my dad was there for, right? This solution that he needed was an affinity program, which meant that ISA wasn't even the actual provider of the solution. They just connected into it, but it kept him a loyal member for 40 years. So, some people might look at kind of some of those small benefits and be like, well, does anybody care about this? That gets back to the whole thing of you need to look at people's behavior in addition to what they say, because sometimes their behavior can show you some very interesting things that you might not have otherwise figured out.
Right, right. So I guess like what you're saying is we have to look at how much the benefits are being used, and like if there's one benefit, for example, the insurance, right? If it is being used by even like 30 members for 40 years, that tells you a lot about it. That tells you a lot about it, right?
Right, and I mean, 40-year membership. Talk about lifetime value.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Okay. That answers my question. Now, Elizabeth, since we build a lot of membership websites, where do you see membership websites come in member engagement?
Oh my God. How much time do we have to talk about user experience?
Maybe 1 or 2 minutes.
Right. No, but user experience of your association website is so important because these days, that is your storefront, right? Your website is your face to the world. And one of the problems that I see with association websites, we're getting better about this, I will say, but one of the problems I see with association websites, and this has been the case for 25 years, is that too many of them are structured by the way we structure our internal departments. They're super busy. Everybody wants their thing on the front page, above the fold, because like that says that I'm important and my program is important. Our calls to action are way too hard to follow. There tends to be a lot of barriers and hoops that you have to jump through to complete transactions. And I'm not saying that like information architecture and and call to action process and online features and what should be available and what shouldn't, like this is all like super easy. No, this is hard stuff, right? That's where there are firms and consultants that specialize in this. But our websites tend to follow the same pattern as the way we think about engagement, where it's kind of inwardly focused and inwardly structured. And what you want to do is have it structured so that it's member-centric, so that it makes sense to your audiences. So like, what does that look like in a practical sense? Well, one, information that's organized like your audience is organized, not like your internal departments are organized, right? Your members should not need to know what your internal structure is in order to find stuff on your website. That's ridiculous. You want to allocate prime real estate based on what's important to your members, not based on kind of internal political considerations. You need to make it easy for people to do what you're asking them to do. And I realize that that's not 100% under your control necessarily, because some of this is mediated by your AMS, your LMS. There are other systems that you're connecting with that sometimes drive how your site functions. But even within that, you need to do everything you possibly can to make it easy for people to do what you're asking them to do. By the way, there is a beautiful example of like all of this stuff in operation, which is the American Society for Microbiology, asm.org. They relaunched their website, like time with the pandemic, time is meaningless. But I think it was like sort of like right at the beginning of the pandemic, or possibly just a little bit before that. But like all this stuff that I just talked about, having the information organized in ways that make sense to the members, not by your internal departmental structure, making it easy for people to do stuff, allocating real estate based on what's important to the members, not what's important to, your internal politics, et cetera. They did all that. And it's really, really nice because that creates a beautiful entry point and a beautiful storefront and a beautiful image and a highly usable entry point storefront image for the association out to their members and all their other audiences.
Right, right. So what we tell our audience, our clients all the time is that when you're doing that, try to start by understanding what problem are your members trying to solve. So when they come to your website, what problem are they looking to solve, and then do you actually have a solution to the problem? If you have the solution, say it. Oh, you have this problem, we have this solution, and this is how we are solving it. Right? Sign up for a membership. Right?
And make it easy for them to find it. And one other thing that you have to think about, and this is why in-person user testing is extremely valuable if you can do it, is people seek and find information in different ways. And you have to, some people want to use the navigation. Some people want to search. There's all kinds. Some people want to follow links, right? There's all kinds of different ways that people prefer to find information, and you're going to have whatever your own internal mechanism is for that. And so the way that you're going to set it up for people to find information on your website is probably going to be based on how you find information. Other people find it in different ways. So you've got to think through all those different kinds of ways of interacting. Again, this is why if you can get people in person to do in-person user testing, it is so valuable.
Right. So Elizabeth, if I'm looking to do something about our member engagement now, what would be some actionable steps, or maybe one actionable step that people can take?
Oh, one actionable step. So I would say read my fantastic white paper on member-centric engagement. But seriously, the 8 keys, I'm going to hit them real quick. Pick one of these and do something with it, right? Think like your members. That means get into their worlds. Build real relationships, not just association members, members to association, but also members to members. Organize around a shared purpose. You want to have an inspiring mission. Focus on outcomes rather than how you get there. Look for opportunities to co-create and harness the power of your collaborative community. Encourage continuous learning and take the long view. Don't the first 30 seconds that something doesn't work perfectly, don't just kill it. And so pick one of those things and pick a small project and experiment. So there's a question that I think you're going to ask me to wrap up. I want to hold off on the experiment thing a little bit, but experiment. Be willing to experiment. Sure. Yeah,
absolutely. So I'm going to jump into some audience questions. And by the way, if you're joining us live, if you have any question, please submit your question on chat and we'll pick it up from there. So from the questions submitted online, Sarah is asking, do you have any suggestion on how to best get responses from messages sent to members? We're having a difficult time getting a two-way conversation going with members.
And so, I'd be interested in seeing what she means by a two-way conversation, because you want to think about this is a place where the medium through which you're communicating could be really important. So for instance, we want to get a response from members and we're sending them emails. Ostensibly email is a two-way communications mechanism, but if it's something that's coming out where it looks like a newsletter, it's highly HTML formatted and all that kind of thing, people aren't necessarily going to think to respond back to that, right? Because it looks like something that's coming from, info@organization.org address where nobody's watching that email box, right? And that's they're not intending that to be a two-way conversation. So then you think, oh, social media, awesome. We can totally get conversation going on social media. Well, wait a second. One of the challenges with social media, with associations, or really any type of organization, is people are on social media, but that doesn't necessarily mean they want to be with you on social media, right? So people are on Facebook. Does that mean they want to interact with your association there? Maybe not. You're going to kind of have to pay attention to what your audience likes. Plenty of people are just on Facebook to keep track of their kids and people they went to high school with, right? They're on Twitter. Do they want to interact with your association there? Maybe, maybe not. They're on LinkedIn. Do they want to interact with your association there? There you got a better shot, right? Because that's like the purpose of LinkedIn. But you have to kind of think about what kind of medium are we using, and is it something that intrinsically encourages conversation? Secondly, you want to think about, okay, what type of conversation, right? Does it only count if like the members are interacting back with the association, or does it also count if the members are interacting with each other? Sometimes, the function of your association can be not to like, try to force some sort of slightly artificial feeling relationship between the member and the association. Sometimes it's to create the environment for them to build the relationships with each other and build that network of relationships. And then the third piece is sometimes you got to fake it until you make it, right? So no, seriously. So this is I'm telling a friend story, George Breeden, if any of you know him. But back in the early days of listservs, he worked at ASAE, and ASAE was trying. I mean, this is like real old school listservs. He was trying to get these off the ground when people were still a little suspicious about email. And so what he did is anytime anybody called with a question, he was like, I will get you an answer to your question, but first you must do me a favor, right? And he told them, you've got to post it to our listserv, right? I will make sure that somebody answers it, but you've got to post it to the listserv, right? So you kind of fake it until you make it a little bit. And you can do that in a variety of ways. One of the most effective ones of which is to get kind of like get other members as co-conspirators, to like recruit people for your team to kind of get this thing going. And they can become people that help create that conversation, that more natural conversation once you find the place that your members want it to take place.
Right. So you're saying we should maybe recruit some champion members who can probably volunteer at the beginning to actually drive the engagement, and then get other people involved as well. Something else I can think of as well is that like if we are trying to get a response from member, then maybe our ask should be very clear as well. It should be a very targeted question that this is what we are looking for. This is the question that I have for you. Okay. Do you have any thoughts? If it is like a big article and a footer at the bottom with a question, that is not probably going to work. It should be a very, very direct question towards your members. This is the question. Okay, what do you think?
And that's one thing that fundraising organizations are really good at and associations are not as good at, is that whole idea of a clear call to action.
Right.
Yeah, if just use them as an example, because they create an excellent one for having really good, clear calls to action, which is exactly what you just articulated, Farhad.
That's amazing. So next question is from Vicky Markuson. Vicky is asking how to provide tangible ROI to members who want an investment measured.
Oh man, that's an interesting one, right? And I've got a couple of clients who have worked on this kind of thing. So let's talk about a couple of reasons why this is tough to start off with. Number one, the idea of tangible versus intangible benefits. How do you put a dollar figure on, the value of being able to expand your network? The second thing that makes this hard is that whole idea that I mentioned earlier of like, you're here for two things and the association does 20. And now all of a sudden I'm like, well, okay, that's great that they've listed all this stuff that they do and it's got all this value, but I don't care about any of that stuff. I only care about these two things, and I'm paying for all that other stuff. The other thing that can make this challenging is we're not always trying to think of a nice way to put this. Sometimes we have a tendency to slightly overvalue our benefits. I guess that's a good way to put it, right? How much is your magazine worth? $1 million, right? No, it's not. Like we have a tendency to be like, well, we think this is awesome. Let's put a huge value on it. And that's not always a good idea. Because members can smell BS. So do with that what you will. So when you're thinking about putting together an ROI document, and there's a real difference here between, is this an individual membership or a corporate membership, right? So, for an individual membership, if you can put, there's some stuff that you're going to offer that you can pretty easily put a tangible benefit to, and that's something. Sure, go ahead. Like, you get this thing and it's worth this, and one of my clients right now has a library of recommended practices that are extremely useful in their field, and based on the cost of what it costs to get one and the amount of them that they have, they know that it's worth $10,000, right? That's something they can put a very tangible number on. The corporate thing gets a little bit more interesting, right? Because a lot of times now you're in a situation of CEO is the one of the company is the one who says yes. CFO or somebody in the accounting department is the one who pays the invoice. But the people who are actually benefiting are all the staff. If you can create, and this is not always easy to do, if you can create an activity log of, okay, so CEO, we understand that you have to, okay, paying this, 4 or 5, 6-figure membership that you're gonna tell your CFO, your accounting office to write the check for. Let me give you a list of everything that everyone who's attached to your company did with us in the past year, so that you can understand what your investment is going to. So it's that that really varies a lot based on the type of members you have.
Right. All right. Next question is from Sarah Dickey. Sarah is asking, what are some low-cost, high-impact ways of increasing outreach to new and different audiences?
So low-cost, high-impact?
Yeah. So what are some low-cost and high-impact ways to increase outreach to your audiences?
That's a good question. Email's real cheap, and everybody's inundated. But one of the things, and this is something that Amanda Kaiser of Kaiser Insights did a report like 2 years ago with dynamic benchmarking, maybe 3, with dynamic benchmarking on actual data-driven what works for new member engagement. And so, I have totally stolen this from her. I give her credit for it, full credit all the time. It's awesome. 3-3-6, right? When somebody is a new member, you want to have 3 communications in the first week, 1 a week for the remaining weeks of the first month, and then 1 a month for the first 6 months. And what you want to do with those communications, and this gets to the actual question, is instead of just, every single time you do this, sending out a bullet pointed list of all the features that your association offers, in each one of those communications, highlight something unique and explain why it's a benefit. So, tell the members, not just we have this thing, tell them this is what it is going to help you do. This is the problem that you have that it's going to help you solve. This is the goal that you're trying to achieve. Right? This is why people associate in the first place, right? They're trying to accomplish something that they can't by themselves, right? This is the thing that you're trying to accomplish that you can't by yourself, that it will help you with. They don't all have to be email. If you've got a little bit of cash to make some phone calls, or you don't you're not getting like 10,000 new members every month, right? Like if you're getting a smallish amount of new members, you can make some calls. If you got a little bit of cash, you could do a mailing. Email's okay, right? Do that trickle of information about, here's one more thing that we offer. 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 The other thing is back to data collection, right? You can pay attention to who responds to what. Most people come to your association for 2 to 3 things. The trick is to try to figure out for any given person what those are. If you're introducing your benefits one at a time, you can watch what they actually respond to. That gives you a real good clue about what it is they came to you looking to get.
Right. I'm going to add one more comment to this. So I think Sarah was asking how can you actually increase your outreach to other audiences?
Okay. Yes. Sorry, I missed that part. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries at all. So something that we have been doing quite a bit with a lot of associations and in the workshop that we do is that if you have your own list and that is active, then that's fine, right? But go out and create partnership with other complementary organizations who actually has your audience in their list, right? And then if you kind of co-create some programs with them, you will see that you'll actually start to get some members sign up through the other organization's list as well. So meaning you'll probably have to create an event or something that you're going to co-promote with the other organizations, and then you both benefit from it together. So this is something that has worked really well in our projects in the past.
Well, and another thing that we're both talking around that you just highlighted in your comment is content marketing.
Right.
Provide something valuable for basically free. I mean, like the transaction that everybody's used to these days is I provide you my contact information and you give me the cool free thing, right? But people are totally accustomed to that. But content marketing.
Right. So always create some interesting content and maybe collect people's emails for free when they sign up to the event, just like what we did for this event itself. Whoever signed up for the event, we actually collected your emails. So not that we want to market to you, we are happy that you're here, but this is one of the ways to actually market to new audiences. All right. Elizabeth, those were the questions. Now, I'm going to wrap up because we are out of time. Now, do you have any key takeaway for our audience?
It's be member centric. So one of the resources that Anna and I used in writing the member centric engagement white paper is Bill Lee's book, Hidden Wealth of the Customer. And so, one of the things that he talks about is that when we get overly focused on whatever it is that the organization is trying to accomplish, we get myopic. And so we think I've got to sell this many memberships or sell this many registrations or, get this many butts and seats for committee service or whatever. And there's this whole ecosystem of value around the stuff that we offer and around the people who are in our audiences, who are our customers, who are our volunteers, who are our corporate supporters, who are our members. And if we get overly myopically focused on the thing that the association wants to accomplish and not what the members and other audiences want to accomplish, we are blind to all that additional value. If you can be member-centric, all of a sudden it opens up your eyes and your mind to all those other options.
Wonderful. Elizabeth, can you share a personal habit that makes you successful in your work?
Yeah. So when I was association staff, which, obviously being at this for 25 years and running Spark for the last 9 was the majority of my career, I would say that it was my willingness to do kind of small scale, small bet experiments and pay attention to what results. So that relates to that story about that totally crazy thing that I did with the form for online join that you should definitely not do because people will definitely steal credit card numbers these days. But I was willing to do small scale, small bet experiments, and see what happens. And in my consulting business, I would say that it's the fact that I focus on connecting people with the right resource, even if it's not me.
Right. That's amazing. All right. Elizabeth, we have to wrap up. How can people get in touch with you if they have any question?
Easiest way is my website. So my business is called Spark Consulting and my website is getmespark.com.
That's amazing. All right, Elizabeth, thank you so much for being with us today. It was great chatting with you.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right. That was the episode with Elizabeth. I'm pretty sure you'll find a lot of gold nuggets in this episode. I learned a lot myself for sure. And once again, if you want to grow the membership of your professional association, please take a look at the workshops on our website at gripe.ca/workshops. All right then, we will speak to you again in a future episode. Bye for now.